Hi folks, I've got another Game Master Diary for you today with a tip on how to make your world feel more real. Okay, so you can probably guess from the name of the video that you can see wherever it is, but the advice is to have the world continue outside of what your players are doing. Okay, so what do I mean by this? Essentially what I mean is that the towns and cities and NPCs that your players interact with don't just go into a stasis after they've left and gone to the next location until they come back, but that those characters continue to grow and continue to do stuff. And I think this is really fun for your players because it allows them to see, like, hey, this is the starting town that we started our adventure in, and then we've been gone for a year or two and came back, and what has changed? Did the NPCs that they helped out, did one of them finally open the shop that he was hoping to open? Did the big bad that they stopped, how did that affect the town? Did they accidentally put in place another big bad? Whatever it is, I think that's really fun, and it makes the world feel like a real world because it's going on, and whether the players impact it or not, those characters and those events are still moving forward. So with my homebrew campaign, the way that I did this was I kind of knew all of the NPCs, what their driving goal was. So that I kind of knew, depending on what the player characters did and how events unfolded, that could then inform how those NPCs then acted on getting that goal, or did they abandon that goal? So having that like one central thing I think helps, because then you're not trying to keep track of like all of these different, like, yes, as a person I don't just have one central goal, but as a game master you're gonna need to narrow it down a little just so your brain doesn't explode. So for example, the bartender that they chatted with, when they came back and they dropped off this tooth fairy and were like, hey, we want to make sure he does okay, but we're worried about bringing him on with us, but he likes to like catch creatures and stuff like that. When they finally went back to that town, the tooth fairy was still there and had created a bond and relationship with the bartender, and there was some mixed emotions because I was like, okay, well, the tooth fairy's not necessarily going to know the difference between, yes, mice are good to eat, no, cats aren't good to eat. So, oops. But that was fun. There was also a merchant that they helped out. And so as they came back, he was like, hey, I have more stuff that you can buy because you helped me, so I have more money and I was able to get more things. And if we had continued on with the campaign, they may have found out that he was maybe not the nicest person and had some nefarious plans. But I had some of these major NPCs, I knew kind of what their end goal was going to be. So they were working towards it, and then I had to factor in what the player characters did, and did that help or hinder those goals. Now, I think one thing I could have done a little bit better was to kind of return to some of these starting locations or NPCs a little bit more. I introduced a lot of new stuff. I also didn't know how long the campaign was going to be running and kind of wanted to get a fun, I was having fun world building and being like, let's go to this place and learn about this town and city and culture. And it may have been a little bit easier on myself if I had more of a central location that the players kind of, okay, this was their home base and they went various places from there and then returned. So they could have had a little bit more of that ongoing relationship with those NPCs and seen some of the growth in that. The other side of things is that there might be stuff going on in the world that your player characters aren't directly involved in, but will eventually impact them. I think it is interesting to have, like, drop little hints. Matt Mercer does this a lot of, like, there's a big war going on, or there's a big political unrest, those big major events that are going to eventually have some impact on your players, even if it's not that they get directly involved, but it's the like, oh, you can't get magical items very well because everything's going to the war effort, or because of this, political situation, this country and this country aren't trading, so the supplies that usually are needed for this thing are from this country, and your players are in this country, so they just can't get that. So it adds an interesting complication. It is a lot to keep track of, I will say that. But it makes the world feel more like a real world. It doesn't feel like just the only thing that exists are the characters and what's going on directly around them. It really does make it feel a lot bigger and more expansive of a world. And one way to kind of help keep track of this is writing it down. I know there are a number of different methods for keeping track of your notes. Hey, I made a video about my various methods. But I like to, ahead of time, come up with here are the major NPCs, here's their end goal, as well as, and I'm speaking from the one homebrew campaign that I ran, so if you have better advice, please let's chat about it down in the comments below. But the other thing I did was I knew kind of some major events. While the players were taking care of this thing, there was another faction also kind of taking care of it in a different method. So there were a couple times that the players went over here. Well, that worked out well because the other faction went over here, and then they met up, and that was a fun interaction. So keeping that in mind, as well as keeping in mind then what your players do, how does that impact? And I think not plotting out too much of like, okay, they're going to do this and this and this and this and this, that runs you into the situation of then if your players do something that messes up step 3 of that plan, well, all of that work you did after step 3, that goes to the wind. But just having a broad sense and then filling in the details kind of session by session or chapter by chapter of what's going on in the world that the player characters might find out about, or might not, but may come up. So if you do a little bit of prep here, it will help you out further along. So yeah, if you've got any additional advice on how you keep track of what's going on in the world outside of what is happening in session, let's talk about it more down in the comments below. Share some of that knowledge. A big thanks to our patrons, especially Joan. If you want to support our channel, you can head over to our Patreon page and check out the perks of being a patron. And if you're interested in keeping up with all of the things we do, not only the videos here, but when we're playing in games, as well as just kind of day-to-day geeky stuff that we're into, make sure to follow us on our social media. Alright, I'll see you next time on Roll for Initiative. Bye!